Good evening, folks. How are you? My name's Roger Hill, and welcome to Alabama Politics 101 again on the Alabama Cable Network, Channel 80 News. Folks, have you ever sat in front of the TV and been so dissatisfied with our political situation in the country? 47 million people on food stamps, financial Armageddon, borrowing money we can't pay back, lying politicians, illegal invasion, refugee resettlement programs with Muslim refugees that we don't need in our country. I've been so upset watching this, I actually throw pillows at the TV. So we've got some real problems in our country. And I've got a gentleman with me tonight, Mr. Terry Richmond. He is with an association or a group that is promoting the utilization of Article 5 of our Constitution. Mr. Terry Richmond. Terry, welcome to our program.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Roger.
Terry, we probably need to talk about the problem and, what are our problems? And I think actually we've got a financial problem, a debt crisis in our country.
That's one.
Two, I think probably a regulatory crisis where the government's regulating businesses and firms and everything out of business. We've got a congressional attack on the sovereignty of states, and then we've got a federal takeover of decision-making processes according to Convention of States. So Terry is the past state liaison, legislative liaison for Convention of States project, Article 5 project in the state of Alabama. Now he is the coordinator for all 8 states that have passed resolutions to call for a Convention of States to discuss amending the Constitution under Article 5. Is that right, Terry?
You said it exactly right, Roger. Amending the Constitution under Article 5. That's
now,
precisely.
how can that be possible?
Well, it's interesting that the original Constitution, there were only 7 articles in the original Constitution, before the Bill of Rights, before anything. And the Founding Fathers decided that the only way to stop another shooting revolution like they had just gone through, because the states were all bickering, they couldn't pay the army, they couldn't do anything. The group, the document it was organized under was called the Articles of Confederation. And it was designed, and it was a very weak federal system. They had no teeth. They couldn't raise money, they couldn't pay the army, they couldn't do anything unless the states agreed to do it. So through a series of conventions, they called the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia. Some people might be watching things in Philadelphia right now. But anyway, back to your question, how do we do this? In that original Constitutional Convention, they came up with Article 5, which said, if we ever need to change this document, like we're changing the Articles of Confederation now, if we ever need to change it, we need to have a way to not make it such a big deal. So we're going to let Congress, 2/3 of both houses, if they approve it and say it's a good idea, send it out. If 3/4 of the states agree to it, then it becomes part of this Constitution. That's the way we're going to fix this. And they went through the whole summer, and it's hot in Philadelphia, as some people know now. And finally, 2 days before they were fixing to adjourn, Colonel George Mason, who was a Virginia delegate to this convention, said, wait a minute, guys. Congress could get out of control. The federal government that we've been so careful not to give any power to in the Articles of Confederation could get totally out of control. And we're right back to where we are now. We'll have to go to a shooting war, and we'll have to, that's just not a good thing. We need to let the sovereign states that called this convention to start with have a civilized, peaceful, legal way to amend it. to say, we really ought to do this, or we really ought to do that. Because just like everything the man puts together, it's going to get out of control. And we're going to have to correct an unforeseen issue that, you know, we've been here all summer. We've done the best job we can do, but there's something I'm sure we've left out. So we need a peaceful way to fix it. And if we only give it to Congress, that's really not a good idea. And so we need the state legislatures to be able to do the same thing. So that's what the Convention of States Project is all about. If 2/3 of the states, just like in the House and the Senate, if 2/3 of the states say, we need to have an amending convention, the convention will be called. If they agree on an amendment, it'll go out. If 3/4 of the states agree it's a good idea, it becomes part of the Constitution. Interestingly enough, Congress only has a ministerial power. They can't decide what to do about the convention specifically. The governors of the states are not involved, and the President of the United States is not involved. It's we the people saying this is what we need to do.
Well, according to the Article 5, and I'd like for you to read it in just a minute, there's 2 ways to amend the Constitution. George Mason said, what if we have a rampant situation where the government's out of control, that the federal government gets too powerful and oversteps their bounds? And actually, folks, the Constitution of the United States was written in favor of the states. And actually, all the power now has been taken by the federal government, actually slowly but surely. They've been mandating that the states, well, I'll give you a perfect example of the transgender law that it's an executive order that Obama passed, says that transgenders can bathe in the bathrooms with our little girls in school, or they're not going to give us our tax money back that we've sent them. That's just an example of overstepping their bounds and then getting involved in state sovereignty. So why don't you just read that, if you will, Mr. Richmond, and let's see if it explains it a little better than I can, or you can.
I'm going to read it down to where it doesn't make any difference after, because it's past 1808. But the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. Or, that's the first way. The second way, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. Proposing amendments. Not changing the whole Constitution. Proposing amendments. Which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. Now, as one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. And then it goes on to say that nothing, if it's before 1808, which we're not going to worry about. Okay, altogether, Article 5 has 143 words, 13 commas, 1 semicolon, and 1 period. We don't write like that anymore. So that just shows you the power that they put in to writing those original 7 articles to the Constitution. Part of the consternation of getting it approved the first time was there's no Bill of Rights. The state of Virginia came back to the Congress and said, we want you to call a convention of the states, which is where we get our name, over here, to make sure that we've got freedom of religion, etc., etc., etc. They proposed 12 amendments. 10 of those amendments were quickly approved. That was the original Bill of Rights. The 11th one, actually the 12th one, was approved 2 years ago, 202 years after it was proposed.
Well, you know, one of the things is, even though in the Constitution there's two ways to amend the Constitution, right now there's never been an amendment passed the way we're talking about, folks. Right now, the process, and correct me if I'm wrong, every state legislature has to pass a resolution requesting a convention or to discuss articles or amendments to the Constitution at a convention. We have to have 31 states, isn't that right?
34.
34 to call the convention, and how many? 38 to ratify?
Correct,
Right?
absolutely.
So, has to pass a resolution requesting a convention or to discuss articles or amendments to the Constitution at a convention. We have to have 31 states, isn't that right?
34.
34 to call the convention, and how many? 38 to ratify?
Correct,
Right?
absolutely.
So you have a situation where it's virtually almost impossible to get this thing worked out. But all of the states are getting on board. We have 8 states now that have passed the resolutions to go to the convention.
26 to go to meet the threshold of 34, but let me back up a little bit. The two ways to do it, the first way is for Congress to do
Right.
it. Over the 139, 40 years, Congress has proposed 11,000 plus constitutional amendments. The states have proposed 400 and some constitutional amendments. The problem is that of these 400 amendments, let's take the balanced budget amendment. That's a pretty good idea, I think. But you don't balance your checkbook like I balance mine. Unless the words are exactly the same, they don't match. So that doesn't go to something called aggregation. So they don't count all the balanced budget amendments that have been put in as being up to 34, even though there's been a whole bunch of them, if the words aren't exactly the same.
Well, can you explain the process, though? I think we're getting bogged down a little bit.
Okay.
Explain the process that each state must go through. And folks, we've been involved, and Terry and I'm a district captain for the 13th Alabama Legislative District. And we've been involved in lobbying representatives in Mississippi and other areas to get other states involved. So what is the process? And let me tell you why we're doing this. We're doing this to rein in the federal government and to preserve our liberties. Actually, that's what this is all about, and we're slowly losing them. But what's the process that a state has to go through, Terry, to get involved in the process?
Well, we actually have a draft application on our website, conventionofstates.com, and conventionofstates, cosaction.com. And that's why we're doing something that's never been done before. 40 states have introduced the exact same operative language.
They have to do that, don't they?
It's got to be
Right.
exactly the same operative language. And the 3 things we're asking for is fiscal responsibility, control regulations, and term limits. Those 3 subjects of the ones we mentioned, practically all of the amendments that you can ask for, I think we're going to show a Levin video. His book, Liberty Amendments, has 11 amendments. 10 and a half of them are fit in those 3 categories.
Well, I was going to talk about, that's what got me involved in Convention of States Article 5 project. I actually heard Sean Hannity on Fox News talking about, actually he was interviewing Mark Levin, who's a radio talk show host. He's also author of several books on our liberties. He wrote one called The Liberty Amendment, folks. I recommend it. It's strictly his version of how to utilize Article 5. And he has 11 suggested amendments. Now, they're just strictly suggested. But here is a list of those 11 in his book. And that's not to say that what Terry's talking about is the 3 broad amendments, right?
Well, but
they're all included in
the specific amendments like that Levin is talking about, at the last page, I guess, he says, these are my suggestions. I know we have a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what Convention of States is saying. We have a problem. Let's open the floor for discussion, which is what an amending convention would be. Those 11 amendments specifically, 10 and a half of them, specifically address one of those 3 points, so they would be germane. They would be appropriate.
Let me go over these and see how the people feel, see if this rings a bell to any of you guys. The 11 amendments proposed by Mark were imposed congressional term limits. I think that makes a lot of sense. People are staying up there forever, and they're walking the fence and staying up there on our tax dollars and actually not getting anything done. They're all sort of at a stalemate. Repeal the 17th Amendment. Well, let me tell you what the 17th Amendment was, and I think this is a good idea. 17th Amendment was to, at one time in the Constitution, all the senators were responsible to the state legislatures. They weren't elected by the people, they were appointed by the state legislatures, and they were responsible to the state legislatures. Well, the 17th Amendment changed that. Now they run for election, and they're open to funding from all over the United States. So what Mark is proposing is, let's repeal the 17th Amendment, and let's go back to your 2 state senators are responsible to the legislatures. If they don't do what they're told by the legislatures, they go home, or they get unappointed. And then term limits on Supreme Court justices. These people are staying up there till 80 and 90 years old, and they die out. And in times like right now, we're sitting here without a Supreme Court justice. The court is to the left right now. No telling who's going to be appointed, especially if Hillary Clinton is elected. But define a deadline on filing taxes 1 day before the next federal election. Subject federal departments and bureaucratic regulations to reauthorization and review. Create a more specific definition of commerce clause. Limit eminent domain powers by the federal government. Allow states to be more easily amend the Constitution. Create a process that 2/3 of the states can nullify federal laws. Require photo ID to vote, and limit early voting. Those are just some of the things that Mark came up with, and that's what got me involved in the program.
So let me just, I gotta clarify something. There's 2 organizations here. One of them is a Convention of States .com website, and the other one is cosaction.com. The Convention of States.com website is the original one, and it's the project of a Citizens for Self-Governance, which is a 501c3. It can only do educational things. The cosaction.com website is the one where we lobby and we go propose amendments and get co-sponsors and sponsors, and it's a C4, and it can engage in political things. So I know we want to talk about what's going on everywhere, and I think we've alluded to it twice, but the conventionofstates.com is non-denominational, if you will.
Yeah.
We need red states, blue states, purple states, green states. We need all the states.
This crosses all bounds. It doesn't matter about you if you're black, you're white, you're Hispanic, you're a Democrat, you're Republican, you're Libertarian. It doesn't matter about your political persuasion. This is about your liberties, and you need to get involved in this program, folks. But Terry, tell us what really got you involved in this.
Well, I guess I'm an old Tea Party guy, and the Western Union version is, after about 3 years of Tea Party, I said, I don't see any dirt moving here.
Yeah, nothing happening.
Nothing happening.
The establishment has control.
So I found the Convention of States, and I said, wait a minute, these guys have a plan. There's a beginning, and a middle, and an end. Now, I will tell you that is what really blew my skirt up and got me involved. But since then, I will tell you that it's changed a little bit, because there is no end. If we take our eye off the ball again, there's going to be two guys sitting here in 20, 30 years having the same discussion. We've got to create a motivated, engaged, and an informed electorate. And I actually have heard some people say that the Constitution should be done away with because it's irrelevant and it's too old.
Well, it is to some folks.
Well, that is a faux argument. It is a false argument because there's a book that I like that was written 2,000 years ago that's just as relevant today as it was then.
Well, I think our Constitution was based on the Bible and Moses' laws and the Christian faith. But you know, to give you an idea, folks, of how out of control the Washington establishment is, they don't even realize it. And I was thinking about this, and we talked about this earlier, is why would the Democratic Party, now if you're a Democrat, listen to this, why would the Democratic Party even want to have primaries, even want to have a convention, when they virtually appoint a presidential candidate? And what you say, what do I mean? Well, the DNC had problems. They had a girl named Schultz. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the director of the Democratic National Committee. She was also working for Hillary Clinton the whole time, and all her minions and all the money from the DNC, they had picked a candidate. They assigned them 485 super delegates to be Hillary Clinton delegates, and old Bernie was still running pretty strong. I think he got 46% of the vote. But they had picked them a candidate. So why waste time with a primary? Why even get the people involved? It's sort of like the Russian government and the proletariat over there. We're going to have Putin as our president. Doesn't matter what the people say. Now, folks, you tell me that ain't an out-of-control government when the Secretary of State can be caught by Jim Comey lying on 6 or 8 occasions and say, well, we couldn't find any grounds to prosecute her. All I'm saying is, if you're a Democrat, if you're Republican, if you're black, you're white, it doesn't matter. We need Convention of States Article 5 project. We need to go in there and let the states utilize the powers that they were given in the Constitution to amend this Constitution. Congress is the only people that have done it. Now we've got a Supreme Court that's going to be making laws from the bench. They're regulating us to death. Them, these EPA, and all these other agencies. Folks, there's a reason why we're sitting here talking about this. I've got a little short video I want to show you. Amanda Reed prepared this. She's from Alabama. Her father was the ex-Alabama director for COS, and she prepared this for you, and it explains it a little bit better than we can, but she explains it how Article 5 works. So watch this.
The United States Constitution was written to form a more perfect union that would enable checks and balances to prevent a bloody revolution from being a necessary measure to abolish tyranny. Excellent though it was, Colonel George Mason feared the national government might one day end in a tyrannical aristocracy. The rights of the people needed to be secured against potential corruption at the national level. One of the solutions the framers decided upon can be found in Article 5, which gives state legislators the authority to call a convention that bypasses federal legislators to amend the Constitution. That gives we the people the opportunity to make some long overdue structural adjustments. Maybe term limits would be a good place to start. Here's how the process works. Citizens request their state legislators to pass a bill called an application, with operative language identical in each state. These legislators of the states then pass the application. Generally, only a simple majority is needed. Congress shall, by law, call a convention of the states as soon as it receives applications from 2/3 of the state legislatures. That's 34 states. Delegates chosen by the state legislatures attend the convention. Each state only gets one vote at the convention, but they can send as many delegates to represent the state as they so choose. Amendments are proposed, debated, and voted upon at the convention. Finally, ratification takes place in the states. Each amendment must be ratified by 3/4 of the states in order to become part of the U.S. Constitution. But what about a runaway convention? Let's get a reality check. Like constitutional law scholar Robert G. Nadelson says, there are far more political and legal constraints on a runaway convention than on a runaway Congress. The convention delegates, also called commissioners, are bound to the will of their state legislatures. If they don't vote as their states demand, they get recalled. They might even get sent to prison. Furthermore, a full 3/4 of the state legislatures, we're talking 38 state legislatures, must ratify each and every amendment in order for it to become part of the U.S. Constitution. Even Alexander Hamilton and Abraham Lincoln, who favored national government, emphasized that Article 5 gives states authority over the national government. Hamilton writes that national rulers have no option upon the subject. The words of Article 5 are peremptory. The Congress shall call a convention. And Lincoln says the convention mode seems preferable in that it allows amendments to originate with the people themselves. Article 5 Convention of the States is a safe route to stopping federal overreach. Civilizations rise and fall. Let's be a civilization that saw the cycle of collapse coming and broke it.
Welcome back, folks. We're here with Terry Richmond, if you're joining us late, with the Convention of States project. And Terry, could you tell us, we have a lot of people probably confused, the process that is involved again, and then how many states that we have already with resolutions passed for a convention, and then how many do we have it in process? How many have actual before Congress?
What's the scorecard? Well, the scorecard is we've passed in 8 states. We need a total of 34 to call the convention. We're active in all but 9 states right now. And by that, the reason we're not active in all the states, some states are actually, they only meet every other year. Okay, so some of it's a calendar thing, and some of it is actually a political thing. But I want to go back to something you said earlier about it doesn't make a difference if you're D or R or L or whatever you are.
Red or blue?
Red or blue, because no single candidate is going to fix this thing. It is a structural problem. It is a machine. And the machine right now is really being run by the 4th unelected branch of government, the regulators, in a thing called the Federal Register. And people say, well, all you got to do is educate the people and elect the right people, and that'll take care of itself. Well, we've been doing that for over 200 years. It is not working out. It is just not working out. We've created a structural problem where now we need to change the structure. And the way you change the structure is you change the Constitution. Well, they're not following the Constitution now. What do you think they're going to? Yeah, in fact, they are following the Constitution. The Constitution, if you read the little book, it's about 7,000 words long. The Constitution we're following is a book about like this. It's 7,000 pages long, and that's the Constitution as interpreted by the courts, by the Supreme Court and the lower courts. That's why we need to change the structure, and that's why Levin's amendments are germane to our 3 subjects.
Well, you know, here's one question that I had when I was looking through all this. If we get this thing rolling and we actually do get enough states to pass resolutions to call a convention, Congress, the President, the Democrat and Republican machines are going to go absolutely crazy in Washington, D.C. Now, what do you envision and how do you handle that? Because they're not going to allow this.
Politicians, going to the dark side for a minute, politicians listen to 2 things, money and votes. We ain't got no money, so we got to have votes, and we are getting a lot of votes. When Alabama passed this resolution a year ago, a little more than a year ago now, we had 2,400 supporters in Alabama. Now we've got 10,646 as of Tuesday.
Well, it's amazing. I just saw it on computer, and I had no idea the the list, the email list and the phone list of supporters and volunteers. This thing, folks, is a groundswell. It's mushrooming, and everybody thinks like we do. Everybody's upset. It doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. Everybody's upset with people spending our money like they're drunken sailors, just like old Ronald Reagan said. He said, they're spending our money like drunken sailors, but he said that's not fair to the sailors because they spent their own money.
They spent their own money.
But you know, I was talking about Mark Levin earlier, and Mark wrote the book, The Liberty Amendments, and he had been so profound about hitting the nail on the head here. I want you to watch this next little video. And it's Mark at a summit. Actually, it was in 2014 or 15 when he made this video, but it's still true today. And he talks about the book, The Liberty Amendments, to these people. And he talks about the why. And it's one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard on trying to take back our country and the solution to this problem. The solution is COS, Convention of States, Article 5. So watch this little clip right here, folks.
Mark, you have been a frequent guest here at the Values Voter Summit over the last 8 years that we've had this. Would you have envisioned 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, that we would be at the point that we're in our nation as it pertains to the ignoring of the constitutional boundaries of what this administration is doing?
Yes, and it's going to get worse. And it's going to get worse because it feeds on itself. We are unmoored from the rule of law. And so the President of the United States can say brazenly, and people barely blink, that if Congress doesn't act, he will. These are the statements of soft tyranny. That's what that is. When Congress says they're going to pass omnibus bills, and they pass them in the dark of night, Obamacare, and we, the people, don't even get an opportunity to read it in advance, that is called tyranny. When the bureaucracy spits out rules that shut down our coal mines and shut down pipelines and shut down our fisheries, even though Congress hasn't agreed to act, that's called tyranny. When the Supreme Court of the United States overturns votes in California or rewrites our statutes in this country, that's called tyranny. So what are we going to do about it? That's the question, and that's why I wrote it.
And let's talk about that answer. How do you actually propose something in this book that heretofore you were not supportive of?
That's good. I propose that we look at the Constitution to find the answer to what's going on in this country. We don't have to invent it. We don't need abstractions. We don't have to make it up. And it's in the Constitution. And George Mason said, and he was right, that when Congress turns oppressive, and what he meant was this new federal government, that the people have to have recourse short of violence. And he said that recourse is, this is 2 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention. He said that recourse is in the people and the state legislatures, and that they need to be able to go to the state legislatures, and the state legislatures collectively, 2/3, can have a meeting called a convention, not a constitutional convention, a convention to propose amendments to all the other states, just as if Congress meets to propose amendments to the states. And that is how we return to a constitutional republic, which, folks, we simply do not have today.
So the key here is, one of the keys, is returning a focus to the states, which in many ways have just become the lackeys for the federal government in terms that this administration expects the states to carry out its orders, where it really should be reversed.
You realize the states have less influence in our government than like LULAC or the AFL-CIO or whatever they are. And the fact is that under our constitutional system, it's the federal government that has limited defined powers, and the states have plenary authority. But obviously that doesn't happen today, does it? Now, some of you come from blue states. I apologize that you're in these blue states. I refuse to live in a dark blue state, but some of you live in dark blue states, and you're saying, well, this is great for those of you who are in purple states and red states, and my answer to you is this. America is a blue state right now, and the only way to address this is to find 34 state legislatures and to take the time to do it. It took us a century to get here, and so it may take us 20 or 30 years to get out of this. But we have no options. This is the only option. It's us in the state legislatures, and the state legislatures collectively have enormous power. Enormous power. Not the governors, they're not involved. Not the state courts, they're not involved. I don't care if no senator or no member of Congress supports this. We bypass them. That's the entire purpose of this process. When you watch the Senate floor and you see a handful of conservatives defending this nation against Obamacare, and they are under brutal assault in their own party, something is wrong. When Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and Rand Paul are the exception, something is wrong in that party. And I do not believe that Washington intends to reform itself. Just see it, what's going on right now. What are they fighting over? Really, they're fighting over nothing. We have a $17 trillion fiscal operating debt that's growing by $1 trillion every year. We have over $90 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Not a darn thing they're doing up there is going to change that trajectory. So what are we going to do? Surrender to this? Well, we have to stand up for ourselves. And the way we stand up for ourselves is in the state legislatures. One at a time, patiently but aggressively, we take back our country.
With the focus being on the states and the pathway forward that you've laid out in the Liberty Amendments, which, by the way, is available here at the bookstore, you've got to be encouraged by what you've seen happen in the states in the last few years. I mean, there are good trends at the state. When you look at what's happening here in Washington as the backdrop, that is discouraging. But what's happening in the states is quite encouraging.
It's encouraging, and what's happening is a lot of the states are trying to resist in different ways that they can, because what's happened in Washington, D.C., we don't really have checks and balances. What you're seeing going on right now, I can already tell you what's going to happen. The debt's going to go up. There's still going to be a massive yearly deficit. They'll throw us something like repeal of the medical tax or something like that, but it's going to keep moving in that direction because that's all they know, because the left knows that they run the country. And the Republicans basically support the status quo with some adjustment. That's about it. So we're stuck. If you think this top-down, authoritarian, centralized method that somehow we can fix this. I'm not saying don't stop fighting in these primaries and everything. Of course, fight everywhere and at every time. But fundamentally, at least for the last 100 years and certainly the last 80 years, what's happened is they've changed the system. So the social compact's been broken. So the Constitution is not honored. And so if they're not honoring the Constitution, what do we, who believe in constitutional republicanism, what do we do about it? And I'm just saying that the framers told us what to do about it if we seek to do it. Now, I accept that humans are imperfect. I accept that every institution in this country is imperfect. I accept that states are imperfect. But that's the genius of the federalism system. Power is dispersed. If you have one out-of-control state or 10 out-of-control states, there's still 40 more states. But if you have one out-of-control Supreme Court, one out-of-control Congress, and one out-of-control president, there's nowhere to go. And that's the problem. Unless we go back to the Constitution to save the Constitution. That's the answer.
Welcome back, folks. With my guest, Terry Richmond, with the Convention of States program. Something that Mark Levin said, we got to go back to the Constitution to save the Constitution. He's talking about a solution to the problems that we have in Washington, D.C. We have a runaway government, out of control. We have to utilize Article 5, and we do it through a Convention of States project. Terry, there's some questions probably some of the viewers are asking themselves, and I'm going to run through those pretty quickly. Can Congress block a Convention of States?
No, they cannot. I read it earlier. Congress shall, S-H-A-L-L, call a convention for proposing amendments. And that's one of the things that the detractors for Convention of States say, that it will be out of control. No, they shall call a convention for proposing amendments. We're not talking about rewriting the Constitution.
According to Article 5, there's two ways to propose amendments. One is through the states and one is through Congress.
That's right.
Article 5 says Congress calls the convention. Does this mean they control the convention and they choose the delegates?
No, that's another opposition point, talking point, actually. And the point is that we have had over 30 conventions of states before this year, before now.
But never had a successful
We've
one.
never had one in the modern era. The last one was 1922, and there were 7 states involved.
But
And
you know, one of the things, Terry, is through social media, through the internet, through email, through telephones and everything, we can get the message out. And this thing can be a groundswell. It can mushroom, folks. Like he said, we have over 10,000 volunteers in the state of Alabama in just a short period of time. But another question is, how do the states choose their delegates to go to the convention? And how are they, what controls do they have on those people when they get there?
the delegates are chosen by however the state decides, okay? That's the next 2 bills we need to pass in the Alabama legislature. How they'll be controlled and how many, and who appoints them and how that happens. Most, in the history of convention of states that we've had in this country, they've been appointed by the legislature. They haven't always been legislators, but the legislature has appointed them. The way they're controlled then is they get a thing called a commission. I was a commissioned officer in the Army. There's things you can do, things you can't do. You stay in your commission. That's how you control them.
I understood that there's a possibility that they may pass state laws that makes it a violation of those laws if they go to a convention and vary from whatever the delegation, whatever the legislature appoints them to do.
The two bills that we passed that we had proposed the last 2 years make it actually, I think it's a felony, Class C felony, and they get immediately recalled. I mean, this is serious business.
So they don't have a runaway convention.
That's precisely it.
What happens at the convention of states? I mean, if it does materialize, what happens? I know they've had summit meetings for the last 3 or 4 years. All the states have had representatives there, over hundreds and hundreds of representatives to discuss how to organize. It's called the Mount Vernon Summit, what it was called for the last 3 or 4 years.
That was the original one. Now there's actually a COS caucus, Convention of States caucus. We have proposed rules that are on our website for how the convention will run precisely day by day. They're proposed because the convention, once they're gaveled to order, they become a self-governing body, and they can adopt the rules that they want to use for the housekeeping and for everything else. But they're still bound by the commissioners are still bound by the commission from the states.
Well, another question is how do we know how a convention of states will work? Is it because of these pre-existing?
Because of these 30 plus conventions that we've already had. We know it's one state, one vote. You can send one senator or one congressman or one commissioner, one delegate, or you can send 100, but it's one state, one vote. Interestingly enough, if you send an even number and they deadlock again on something, that state is counted as present, but there's no preference given to either side of the argument.
Well, another question is a convention of the states safe?
That is totally, it is totally safe.
It might be figuratively safe, but there again, it may literally be something else with what we've got going on in our country right now.
Well, it's not a convention like the conventions we're seeing right now. It's not a Republican or a Democrat. It's not that at all. It's a convention of sovereigns, and it's not it's not people standing up making speeches and gaveling things through over the objections of the populace. And is it safe? Yes, because it's been 240 years. We've never had one like this. If we have one, even if we get 34 states together and all the states will be invited, whether they voted for it or not. But then but if they say this is a good amendment, it needs to go out for ratification, then it takes 38 states to make that happen.
To ratify and go along with it. So you only have about how many states? 15 states that
Yeah.
No vote.
Yeah. 13, one house.
13 states left.
One house in 13 states could kill it.
Yeah. So it would be hard, folks, for this to work, but it's going to take some time, and I think we have a solution to our out-of-control government. There's another video we'd like for you to watch. It was on Daily Ledger TV show, a fellow named Mike Ruthenberg, the Citizens for Self-Governance, is discussing the original anti-establishment solution.
And that's
Article
what
5.
this is. That's exactly what this is.
So let's watch this little video, folks.
Our government has been hijacked by a permanent Washington, D.C. establishment elite. And short of violent upheaval, like in Philadelphia, there's only one way that we, the people, can fix this bureaucratic mess. Joining me now from Southern California, Executive Vice President of Citizens for Self-Governance, Mike Ruthenberg. Mike, I want to go back to Donald Trump's speech on Thursday night at the Republican National Convention. He had some great ideas, but many of his ideas he would have to fulfill by working with the United States Congress. And in the Senate, for example, you have some longtime senators, like on the Republican side, Mitch McConnell, who I'm not exactly a fan of. And on the other side, you have people like Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer, who I'm a larger not fan of either of those two. My point is that these are essentially lifelong politicians that have been in the Senate way, way, way too long. And an Article 5 Convention of the States would help achieve the goals that Donald Trump wants to try and get done for this country by, for example, instituting term limits and get these people out of there.
Well, I'll tell you, the enumerated powers that the Constitution granted to the federal government have been under attack for quite some time, and the anti-establishment feeling, both on the Democrat side and the Republican side, are so evident that you're seeing it in the streets. You're seeing people extremely upset. And an Article 5 Convention of States is really the original anti-establishment process or solution that can fix this problem. There are so many fundamental problems that the federal government has created over so many years that it doesn't matter who is elected. You can tell on both sides, right. It's all about me, all about me.
And another example, trying to balance the budget. If President Donald Trump wants to try and balance the budget, there's a problem there with Congress because, of course, Congress could submit a budget that's over budget. And he doesn't have a line item veto. It's only accept or veto. And so a balanced budget amendment would then require these yahoos in Washington, D.C. to get the job done. And when we look at this election in particular, Mike, worst case scenario, in my opinion, if Hillary Clinton is elected, then it makes an Article 5 even more important.
And the reason for that is because we're likely to see 3 different Supreme Court justices change, and to appoint 3 liberal Supreme Court justices means that the way that the Constitution is interpreted for now and literally 2 generations into the future will be at stake. So some of our constitutional guarantees are no longer guaranteed because of what's happening with the Supreme Court. There's no checks and balances with the Supreme Court. We don't have the ability to overturn anything a Supreme Court should do. So if we get an activist court, that could spell a very big change for America.
Okay, I get in arguments with, nice arguments, civil arguments, with folks who are opposed to an Article 5, and they say nullification is the way to go. And I argue that it's not, and I give some reasons. Number one, real briefly, could you define nullification? And number 2, tell us why it's unconstitutional?
Yeah, well, nullification is the process, of course, of finding the laws that are unconstitutional and nullifying them or making them void or passing legislation to repeal such laws.
On the state level, correct? So if Alabama doesn't like a federal law, they can say, hey, we're going to nullify this. Is that correct?
Right, except that the Supreme Court is the supreme law of the land, and if the Supreme Court makes some sort of a judgment, then the states are bound by that. Because if you look at our current Constitution, there's about 7,000 words. You look at the way it's interpreted by the federal government or by the Supreme Court, and there's about 7,000 pages. And that is the law of the land. A lot of people say, well, gosh, how come our politicians are not following the Constitution? Well, they're not necessarily following the original Constitution, but they are following the Constitution that's been interpreted by the Supreme Court that we don't have any ability to check or balance.
So you would consider it unconstitutional nullification,
yes,
correct?
Sir.
Okay. Now, We're a little more than halfway through 2016. There are 8 states on board, a convention of the states. 4 of them joined this year. It started off hot, but things have cooled off a little bit because of the summer, and the state houses take breaks, of course. Do you have active campaigns in all 50 states, or are there some holdouts right now?
Well, there are some states that aren't in session, such as Texas. Texas is every other year. Alabama is every other year. So they'll be starting up in this next legislative cycle. And there's some that have annual sessions year-round, some that only go for a couple of months. And so right now we're active in all but 9 different states. And it has mostly to do with the calendar. But the bottom line is we have broken a record. Never in the history of America have there been 34 different states with concurrent resolutions all filed all at the same time. And the momentum we have, we've literally doubled in this last year the number of states that we've passed. And we're looking at 16 to 22 next year, realistically.
And it's just as important for red states and blue states to participate. You know, Texas obviously is probably going to come on board. I would imagine they'll probably come on board before the end of this calendar year to support a convention of the states. But on the other hand, California, the state that you're in, probably would be brought to the table dragging and kicking. But it's crucial for all states to participate in an event like this.
Well, the good news is, even though it's a very high bar to cross in order to propose amendments to the Constitution via a convention of states, it only takes 34 or 3/4 of the states in order to pass this resolution or this law or bill, whatever you want to call it, in order to make that happen. So if we have some holdout states such as California, maybe Illinois, maybe New York, then we don't need them in order to pass. So we focus on the states that we think can pass. We target roughly 40 states, but we are active in every single state, and we haven't given up on a single state.
So 26 to go, and we'll have a critical mass for a convention of the states. Hey, listen, the system is broken, and if your engine is blown, you don't just put more oil in the engine and hope it goes away. You have to overhaul the system, and that's what an Article 5 is. Mike, thanks.
Well, folks, I think we have a solution, and I hope you do too. Have we hit a nerve with you? Are you tired of paying taxes and people using them to buy votes with them? I'm going to ask Terry to give you a method to get involved in the program in this groundswell. Terry, can you tell everybody how to get in touch, how to get involved, how to volunteer? We got to reach out to all the states.
Absolutely. Conventionofstates.com. Educate yourself. If you're ready to move, go to COSAction.com. And in the store, you can see you can buy things. Wear this down to the gas station. I'd rather promote this than Nike or somebody else like that. You can even get your name on it. All kind of models. I think that the main thing that we need to do is to create leaders, like we were talking before, an educated, motivated, and engaged electorate at every level. We're having major elections in my hometown of Trussville, the city council, the mayor. Go to those forums, get involved in the Board of Education, get involved in your county government. We have got to get the American people awake and take back our country, because they're not going to give it back to us. It's a structural problem, and we've got the solution to fix this problem. Thank you.
Well, you know, I was making a suggestion to you pre-program. Folks, I think it would be neat if we could have an Alabama convention of the folks that are in this, the volunteers. And what we really need is other states. And you need to contact your representatives in Alabama, of course. But this program goes into Mississippi. If you're in Mississippi, get involved. Call your state legislator and say, hey, let's go with Article 5. Let's go with the Convention of States project. Terry and I have been over there to lobby in the State House. It'll be brought up for election next year or for resolution next spring. But folks, we just ask you to go online to Convention of States, www.conventionofstates.com, and you can go to the Learn tab, the Video tab, and you can find out all you need to know about this. And there's a Volunteer tab where you can volunteer. We'll get back in touch with you. Now then, if you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email at walkercountyteaparty@gmail.com, and send me an email. I'll tell you how to get in touch, or I'll even come talk to you about this. As a district captain, I think it's important that I get back more involved. I really think we need a state convention. That's my suggestion right now. Sort of like the Black Lives Matter or the Blue Lives Matter groups. But anyway, folks, thank you, Terry, for joining us with our program. And appreciate all this great information. Get involved in this groundswell, folks, and be back to see me next week. And may the Lord bless and keep you, and drive safely. Have a good day.
Amen.
What Article 5 gives us is the ability to change the narrative and to ask people the question, should you decide or should Washington, D.C. decide? And I can tell you, I ask that question all over the country, and when I ask it of people on the left or people on the right, I get the same answer. They want to decide in their own community. They don't like Washington, D.C. deciding. To me, that's really what Article 5 is all about.